Hello everyone, welcome to Tangy Paints. My name is Emma and I've decided to start a new series where I teach technical skills for beginners in acrylic painting. I wanted to start with birds because I think it's a really good beginner skill. You learn a little bit of blending, a little bit of drawing, and kind of forming your image based on what you see rather than what you know. Before we get started on the instruction, I'm just going to go over a few of my materials really quick. So I'm going to start with the paper. I use this oil and acrylic paper. It's really nice and thick. I wouldn't recommend watercolor paper or mixed media. There's also canvas paper that you can buy, or you can just get regular canvases from the store. I choose to get my paper from Amazon, but I know that Hobby Lobby has really good options, especially when it comes to canvases. They have really affordable options there. When it comes to my brushes, a lot of these are kind of random, and I got a lot of these either from Amazon or like they were just an old thing that my mom had or something like that. But I have just kind of a lot of random brushes. I would always recommend that you have some sort of big brush, at least big compared to what you're painting on. So this is a big brush for this size. If I was going much bigger, I would probably want a bigger brush for that. A big brush of some kind, a square brush of some kind, or a smaller version of a square brush since my big brush is already square. A round brush of some kind. And you can do multiple sizes of round brushes. So I have these two that I really like. You know, one's a little bigger, one's a little smaller. I like them both. And I also like to have some smaller brushes that I use for details. I tend to really enjoy round brushes more than square brushes. Some people find it the opposite. It doesn't really matter. I have plenty of other brushes besides just these. But I would always, if I was going to choose 4 from this pile, I would choose big brush, square brush, round brush, and detail brush. And these would be the ones that I use. So you don't need to have tons and tons and tons of brushes. It is helpful if you're wanting to do something super specific, but just the basics: big brush, square brush, round brush, small brush. I'm also going to be sketching out what I'm doing ahead of time. It helps me kind of visualize, especially with acrylic paint, goes over anything. If you do a layer of acrylic and you don't like it, you can paint over it really easily. Watercolor is not similar to that. Oil paint, you have to wait a really long time before it dries. I use just a random cheap Bic mechanical pencil. You guys can use anything that you have. It doesn't really matter what pencil. I think as long as it's not really high in graphite where it's going to smudge everywhere, just something, standard like this will work. Now, as far as paint goes, I have a lot of different brands that I use. I always just get what the cheapest option of the level 1 acrylic is at either Michael's or Hobby Lobby. What's cheaper kind of depends. So they have cheaper stuff for holidays. Sometimes Michael's is cheaper, sometimes Hobby Lobby is cheaper. Hobby Lobby will always have cheaper canvases, but it goes back and forth which is cheaper for paint. So I have this Master's Touch brand, which I believe is Hobby Lobby. I have Artist's Loft, which I believe is sold at both, but I get mine at Michael's. And then Liquitex. So these are the 3 brands I use. I don't really notice a difference. It might be the same manufacturer that I don't know about, but I have not noticed a quality difference in these. Whenever I go to like level 2 or level 3 and I get like the higher end, I can't really tell the difference. So I would always just use whatever the cheapest option is that isn't those teeny tiny little craft ones, because those ones usually are way too thin. You have to do a million coats. Another thing that I like to do is having a board like this. I've had this for like 20 years, so I couldn't tell you where I got it, but it's just for watercolor usually. And I like to use it because I can tape my paper down and it doesn't move. It gives me a nice crisp border at the end. I always prefer that. This is the tape I use. This is watercolor tape. It peels much better than masking tape or even frog tape. Usually those, I feel like, always rip up my paper. You know, nothing's ever perfect. Sometimes it does rip anyways, but this I feel like is much more gentle on my paper. So I'll put a link in the description for this specific one because it works really well. So I'm gonna go ahead and start drawing. One thing to keep in mind when you're drawing anything is, like I said before, to draw what you see, not what you know. It's really easy to just come up with a picture of a bird in your head, and then, not that the picture is wrong, but it's really hard to connect a memory of something to like your hand-eye coordination and your brain and then putting it on a page, right? It's always going to be easier with a reference photo. If you're not quite ready to draw, a really good tactic that I used for many years when I was teaching myself how to draw is printing out whatever your reference photo is and then going to some window, and if you put your reference photo and then a sheet of paper on top, as long as the paper is thin enough, and then you kind of put that up to the glass, you can see through and then you're able to trace it. So you can also get a light table and lots of other things that will help you trace. Tracing paper is fine. I find it messy and annoying. So just kind of putting something on a window where you can see through it makes it a lot easier to trace something. But for those of you who are wanting to start drawing, I'm going to go ahead and start. I'll link the reference photo I used in the description as well as posting it somewhere on the screen so you guys can follow along with me. So I'm noticing that my little bird here has its one little wing out, it's got its little tail out, and its head is turned to the side. I'm not going to focus too much on all of these teeny tiny details just yet, because I feel like it's just going to get you lost in the weeds, right? If you're focusing on the eyes and the beak right away, don't focus on that. Focus on the general shape of the body. When we're drawing, we want to put shapes down and then build on top of that, right? So I'm going to go in and put a little oval in. And this is like its chest and its tummy. And it's not meant to be a super honed in shape yet. It's meant to be rough, okay? Now this is its little body. You know, I can see its wing is kind of going up on this side. So I'll kind of put the rough shape in. It's kind of like a teardrop shape. Remember, you can always, you know, if you are like, oh shoot, that wing is way too big or way too small, you know, that's why we have an eraser. So it's okay. It's not always going to look perfect the first time that you try. And that's why you have to practice. Now I can see its other little wing is coming up on the other side, and its little tail is coming up. And its little tail is more of like, I don't know, like a trapezoid kind of a shape. Lots of little like kind of extra lines in here because it's, you know, it's feathers. They're all like overlapping each other and all of that good stuff. Now let's go ahead and put the neck in. So you'll see that there's a little tuft of like white where its neck and its chest is. So I'm going to use that as a guide over here to bring that line down where it's hitting that wing. And then I'm going to bring this down and then I'll start to use that as my guide to kind of bring that head up a little bit. And the head is kind of like, it's really long, or I guess wide in term. It's not like as round as maybe you would imagine a head, like a skull to be. It's a little bit wider here. So I'm gonna bring this over. And one thing I've noticed with a lot of these like really cute fluffy birds is that their head is wider and it comes over, and then there's like a little bit of an angular drop off here. So I'll just bring this over. And remember, all of these pencil lines are gonna get painted completely over. Like you won't see them at the end. This is just so that we know where to even put the paint, right? Now, we need to decide where our beak and eyes are gonna go. So I know that up here, just below it is where my beak starts, and just a tiny little bit is peeking out, and then it kind of goes inwards and then out just again a little bit. Okay, and then from the beak is where kind of the purple on the head starts. And it doesn't have to be, I'm just marking off where I think the purple should go. I might change my mind later, And then I'll put my eye in. So, just a tiny little over and then up is where my eye starts. And it's also like, it's not completely round or completely flat, like maybe a human eye, one side is here and one side is here. With a bird eye, like it's kind of angular. So that point is much higher. It's almost as if it's been rotated slightly, whereas a human eye, would come down all the way down here. So I've got kind of a good baseline for my bird. I'm not trying to make it super, super detailed. I might give it a little bit of fluffiness down here at the bottom. That's literally just me doing like slightly curved lines over and over, and that gives it that fluffiness down there. Now let's go ahead and add our legs in. So one is really far in front, and it's clearly going like behind. So it's like on the other side of the bird, but just a little tiny piece of it is peeking out. I'm just gonna do little kind of curled feet in there. And then I'm gonna go to my backside. And if I were to put this exact image that I have right on top, I'm sure that it wouldn't be exactly the same, right? We're not professionals. We're not trying to make an exact duplicate. This is a reference, but we're creating our own art from a reference, right? So now I've got my little feet and my little toes here. And then I'll just add in my branch that goes at an angle. So if it's not exactly like my reference, that is okay. I also notice as I'm looking at this, its forehead should be coming out just a little bit more. And that's just part of drawing, is maybe you don't notice something earlier and then you notice it later. Maybe you don't notice it until you're painting, and that's just a part of the process. And I might add a little line here because I can see there's a white line on that wing. I'm not really worried about all of the background stuff because we're focusing on the bird. We can always do more videos where we're learning how to do flowers and leaves and all of that good stuff. Today we're learning how to do birds. And I think my foot is wrong here. It should be slightly angled this way, and it's a little longer. So I need to reposition my branch a little bit. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. So I'm gonna start with probably my lighter colors. So it's like this nice beigey kind of gray. It's a little bit in the shadow, right? So I'm gonna use my round brush here. I'm gonna make a nice beigey color. So I'm gonna go in and get some white, tiny little bit of yellow, tiny little bit of orange. See how powerful orange is? You gotta be really careful with orange and blue specifically, because they tend to take over whatever you're mixing them into. If you're making like a yellowy orange color, you have to use like way more yellow than orange every time. So this is a nice yellowy orange. To neutralize anything, you typically want to take the opposite. So for example, we've used orange and yellow, but to turn this from a yellowy orange into a beige, we're going to neutralize that with some blues. Now, I have, because blues are opposite of orange, I have two blues here. I've got ultramarine, which is very cool toned, almost like a shade away from indigo. And I have phthalo blue, which is very warm, oceany, dark blue. So I'm going to get just a tiny little bit. Again, I'm even going to wipe some off just in case. Tiny little bit of that blue. If I need to add more, I can. It's so much harder to get extra of all your other colors because you added too much of one. So I try to just go little by little here. Okay, I want it a little cooler toned. So I'm going to grab just a little bit of purple here. Okay, so I'm a big fan of this current beige that I have. And I'm going to go ahead and start filling in just like the neck and the stomach and the chest. And it's a little behind right over here. And you might be thinking, I can still see the pencil lines. And you would be right. But when we are kind of going in and painting, very, very rarely will you ever do one layer or coat of paint without blending it or mixing it or anything like that. I would say most of the time you're gonna have lots of other colors touching the same spot or the same color going over the same spot multiple times. Now, I'm noticing there's lots of highlights up here in my reference photo. Obviously, there's some orangey yellow down here, and then it's got lots more shadows underneath. So with acrylic, you really need to work quickly when it comes to mixing and blending colors because this is already drying as we speak. So I need to hustle and get some more colors in here. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of create like a shadowy version of my beige. So I'm gonna get some beige, mix it with blue, get a little bit of black in there, a little bit of my other blue. Now, a lot of times for shadow colors, I prefer to use a color called Payne's Gray, which is essentially 50% black, 25% ultramarine, 25% phthalo. However, I ran out, so I have to mix my own. And that's okay. So I'm just using a little dab of each of those colors because I know it makes the color that I want. And I'll just do a little extra white, a little extra yellow, and then a little extra orange. Okay, so now I've kind of created a deeper shade of that beige I made earlier. Very cool toned. Unless the specific lighting of the reference photo demands it, most of the time your shadow colors are going to be cool toned. So I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to keep doing these really short brush strokes. There's maybe a little bit underneath the beak, you know. Its head and its beak would probably cast a shadow. And I'm just gonna go in, and every once in a while, once I've done the bulk of the shadow, which is underneath things that cast a shadow, right? So the beak is gonna cast a shadow, the wing is gonna cast a shadow, the shoulder is gonna cast a little bit of shadow. Everything in here, you want just a little bit of shadows in there, just because the little tufty feathers are gonna be casting their own shadows everywhere else, but not very big. So, you know, you just want a little bit in there. Now that I've got that shadow color, I'm gonna rinse my brush off a little bit. One thing I did forget is that I usually, along with my water, I have a paper towel here to dab off my brush. Sometimes you want a wet brush, sometimes not. So my brush is now pretty much clean. Also, I didn't realize that this was a thing, so if you don't know how to wash a brush, that's totally fine. When you put your brush in, the brush should be hitting the bottom of the glass, and then you're twirling. If you're just sticking your brush in and spinning it in the water, that will do literally nothing. So just so you know, you have to hit the bottom of the glass. Don't be super rough with it, you know, you just, I don't know. You gotta have a little bit of aggravation in the bristles to get the paint out. So I'm gonna wipe my brush off here. Now this has been sitting here, and we wanna make sure that this blends in, right? So I'm gonna go over the top of this with my clean brush, and it's starting to get sticky because it's already drying. That's okay. We'll just go in with our cream color. If your colors are not blending, one of your colors is dry. It's almost always whatever the first color you used was. So if it's not blending, get your first color on your brush again. And almost always, it'll be able to blend. Now, if it's just been too long for either both dry, you just need to do a second coat of both colors, which is, you know, that's annoying, but such is life. Now we've done our shadow color. Let's go ahead and add our highlight color. I'm just going to go in with pure white. I'm going to add some little tufty highlights on the side here. There's also some little bit in the front. And then just kind of throughout, I'm going, just like how we did with our shadow color, I'm just gonna go in and sparingly add little short, slightly curved, tufty brush strokes to add a little bit of depth, right? I just don't want him to look super flat, or her, I don't know. Now, there are a couple of other colors that I'm seeing in the colored parts of our bird's, like, kind of tummy and chest area. So I'm seeing there are parts that have a little bit more yellowy tones, and then there are parts that have maybe a little bit more grayish cool tones. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the yellowy orangey tones first. I don't really need to rinse my brush. It just has white on it, and we're gonna use more white anyways. So I'm gonna get some yellow, some white, and like a tiny bit, like literally, like the tiniest bit of orange. Because like, look, that already made it so orange. So with this yellowy orange, I'm gonna go in underneath his wing. And I'm still doing the same brushstroke over and over. It's just like how much I'm filling in, right? So before I was just doing teeny little strokes everywhere. Now I'm kind of still doing the same teeny strokes. I'm just filling in a bigger spot. Now I'm also seeing some kind of on the lower end of the belly. It's a little bit more subtle, so I'm using my brush a little lighter. I'm not going as heavy. Okay, there's a little bit up here, very subtle, you can barely see it. And there's just a tad underneath his cute little beak. Now this has only been a couple of minutes, and look at kind of the transformation. We're still not done, still lots to go, but just notice like how the tiniest little change can really transform what you're working on. Sometimes when you're painting, it feels like I have no idea what to do to make this look good. This is gonna take so long to change it into what I want, you know, and really it's just about knowing what it is that you don't like what about this am I not liking? And then how do I change the thing I don't like into what I will like, right? Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna get some water and add that to my shadow color. So I'm just gonna get this a little bit more watered down, more thinned out. And I'm gonna get a little bit more purple. So I want it to be a little more cool toned. Maybe a little bit more thinned out. Now, when you guys are using water and paint, it thins it out. It also, just to keep in mind, when I use a thinned out paint like this, when it dries, it will end up being a little lighter than how it goes on. So just keep that in mind. And then another thing to keep in mind is if you are painting on something that is propped up and you have really watery paint, there's a chance it could run. So either laying it down flat when you do that, or maybe holding your plate up, you know, you'll see if things are gonna start to run down your plate. If they run down your plate, they'll run down your canvas. So I might even make this a little, it's like, how cool toned can I make it? Okay. Just a tiny bit of blue. There we go, that's what I'm looking for. So before we had kind of a shadow color beige, you know, it was more of like a very, very light pale brown. This is more of like a very cool toned gray that I'm using. And I'm just gonna go in and I'm adding these very teeny tiny wispy brush strokes. And I'm going really gently, you guys. Like, the harder you press, the thicker your line will be. The lighter you press, the thinner. Look at how the difference between those, right? So how you use your brush is also really important. So just really thin, tiny, wispy brush strokes. This is adding not only to the coloring, right? Look at the depth of that coloring already, but it's also adding some really nice feathery texture. The thing I really love about painting these little fuzzy cute birds is that they're all just like fuzzy pears with like wings and tails. Like it's just a little pear with its head sticking up, you know? A lot of these little cute chickadee looking birds have a really cute and easy or easier shape than like, I don't know, a horse or something is like complicated. It's got a million muscles and tendons and knees everywhere, right? So this is a little bit, you know, better for learning as a beginner. And I think personally, the hardest thing to do with acrylic is learning the pace that you have to go at in order to like have the results you want, because things do dry so fast, right? Now the benefit of things drying really fast is I'm able to paint, like if I wanted to stop, wait 5 minutes, paint this whole thing green, I could, right? So if I wanted to completely change something, I absolutely could. So there's pros and cons. Now I'm getting a little bit of white here because I still want this shadowy gray color, but I also am starting to go into the territory of like where I haven't put a lot of shadows and I don't need more shadows. I still want that cool tone. So I'm just essentially dipping my brush into my bluish, grayish, purpleyishness, and then I'm going into my white. So I have them both on my brush at the same time. Starting to get a little too dark up here, so again, I'm just going in with some more white. And having that beige underneath is really nice because I do like having that kind of warm undertone. But we're just adding lots of layers in here, giving it lots of texture. A little extra water here just to thin it out as I go over that orangey color. Another thing that I'll notice that people will do is they're really concerned about losing their lines, right? So if they're like, oh no, like I accidentally covered up, you know, a line that I went over, right? It's like, well, you know, you drew it, so you can draw it again if you need to. They're guidelines, they're being very helpful in being there, but if you can't see one, it's okay. Like, you know, you're the original creator of the lines. You know, and if you traced, you can always put, you know, your paper up on that glass, however you traced it, with your old reference photo, find it again, you know. You don't need to be timid with your color just so that you don't lose your lines, right? It's better to go over your line. Like, if I was so afraid of losing my line that, like, I went here, now I've got this bare space here, right? So it's better to just go over the line. If you lose it, you lose it. That's okay, right? Now I'm going to go in with just a little more white. Some of my highlights just aren't there anymore, and that's okay. Just put them back in. And having the layers of, like, you know, beige and then gray and then orange and then white. It's like having lots and lots of layers, it's what's gonna give you that just slightly more subtle look of realism. Because, you know, in real life, nothing is flat, you know? Not that our goal is a hyper-realistic painting, but it helps, you know? Okay, so I'm really content with the kind of beige, white, grayish part of our bird here, okay? I'm really liking how it looks. I might want to do a little bit more of that yellow orange, just maybe a little bit of a deeper version of it. So I'm gonna get a little bit more orange here, and then I'm gonna add some water here, and I'm gonna get some of my kind of grayish purple, deepen that up just a little bit, water it down. So I add a little more orange, and then I got a little bit of my gray. And then I'm gonna go in just underneath my wing here. So now I've got like my original yellow orange, and then I've got like the shadow version of it, which I like. I do want just a little more yellow in here. Maybe I'll go in with a little more white. When you guys are beginners as well, if you're not ready for like a certain type of step, if you're like, you know, I feel like I can do a bird, I don't know if I can do like a bird that's got patches of like completely different colors all over it, that's okay. You know what, you're starting somewhere, and you might not be ready for some things, and that's okay. Okay, so I'm like enjoying that. Get that dark color on there. Okay, so I think it's time to do the feet. And the reason I'm doing the feet next is I literally already have like a yellowy orangey color. So I can do like the beak and the feet and whatever. Because then I don't want to have to remix all of that. You know, I already have a little bit of it. So I'll probably do a bit more orange, a bit more yellow, a bit more of this shadowy color. And that looks like a perfect color for my feet here. And I'm just gonna go over that line, go over its little feet. And that's it. I really don't have to do much with the feet. I'm not trying to go too crazy, okay? Now for the beak, I don't know why I rinsed my brush, because I'm gonna have to go in with this color again. And I'm just gonna fill that beak in. We will be adding a shadow color to the beak, so you can see the difference between like the top beak and the bottom beak. Otherwise it's like, how does the birdie open its mouth? Now I've got all my orange on there. I'll probably do my shadow color later on. So I'm gonna start to work on like my purples and my blues and my grays, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and rinse my brush here. And it's a nice like indigo blue purple that I'm seeing. So I'm gonna pick like one color, right? So I'm seeing blues, purples, indigos. Like I'm gonna pick one, do all of that color, then I'll do all of the next color, right? So I'm gonna pick like a nice, very neutral kind of dark blue. And it's starting kind of at the very bottom of the base of the wing, kind of right over here. So I'm gonna mix equal parts of my warm and my cool blue. If you already have a neutral blue, you won't have to do this. You'll just use your blue as is. I do like having a warm blue though, because I can use them for different things, mixing it for different things. And this looks like pretty dark, so I'm gonna add a little bit of black to it. Okay, but it's also not like, you know, right now it's like a midnight blue, like it's really dark. It's not that dark. So I'm gonna add a tiny bit of white. Not so much that it turns gray, right? Like just a little bit. So now it's more of like a navy kind of a color, right? So I'm gonna go in, and it's a little bit on, I know it's scary because this is like a very different color than what we've been working with. But remember, if I put this blue all over this, if I let it dry, I can just go over it. It would be a lot of work, you know, you'd have to make all these colors again, but you could do it. Okay, and then bottom part of this wing as well. And then this wing kind of goes at an angle. These feathers are very like stripy looking up here. You know, there's a little bit of blue further down. And then this same blue, there's a little bit on top of its head. Now, if you're going really slow, I would go in and start to do my other colors on this wing. I would do like the whole wing first. Because I'm a little bit faster, I don't have to worry about my colors drying too fast. So I can just go in, put all of this dark blue exactly where I want it, and then I'll blend afterwards. Okay, and there's a little on the tail. Now, that's it. Okay, so I'm gonna be done with my blue. I probably don't have to rinse my brush. All of these colors are pretty similar. I am gonna go in with some white for these feathers. Now you'll start to see like this texture coming up, and that's just because your paper is thirsty. So I just dip my brush in the water, and then my paint spreads a little easier. So I can still see like the dark colors of this paint. It's nice and streaky now. One thing that you're gonna want to stay away from is like the idea of like every single color that's blended out needs to be the perfect like gradient, because it doesn't. Especially when you're doing stuff that's like in nature. Nothing in nature is a perfect, exact gradient, you know? All right, so let's go ahead and start to do our purple. I don't need to rinse my brush. All these colors are so similar and they're all blending together anyway, so I'm gonna get purple and white. Maybe that was too much white. I'll do a little bit more purple. Okay, so purple and white. This is a lot of this is in the shoulder area. And I am leaving this little, I don't even know. It's like a little line because I know that wing is separated by a little strand of pigment in there. Okay, get a little water just to be able to spread that paint nice and evenly. And then I'm gonna start to go into its little head with this purple, and that's gonna blend in. You'll notice that when I'm blending colors, I'm not putting the color next to it. I'm going over the top, like I'm overlapping my colors. Because if your paint colors never touch, if they're just next to each other, you need to overlap them and then use your brush to go over the top for them to actually start to collide on your paper or canvas. I'm also noticing like my purple is very cool toned, and the reference has some cool toned purples, but it also has more like magenta warm purple. So I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna grab my magenta. So this is like a hot pink. I'm just gonna add that. And I'm just gonna take this purple I already have and then mix some of my hot pink into it. Okay, and then there's lots of this kind of magenta-y purple in the shoulder. And there's some at the kind of top of the head here. And then there's a tiny bit on its little cheek here. And a lot of this that we have remaining on the face is either grays or white. Now with this purpley mess that I have, I'm just gonna go in and grab my white because I want the remaining color on here, but I just don't want it as deep as what I have here. And I'm gonna go ahead and fill the rest of the tail in with this kind of concoction of messy colors that I have. I'm gonna get a little bit more of that blue. Just extend that up a little bit. And the back side is a very cool toned blue. It's not as neutral as our other dark blue. So I'm gonna get my cool toned blue from my palette and a little bit of my black. And I'm just gonna fill all of that in. And I am gonna get some water because again, my paper is really wanting to have that texture to it. And that's okay. It's like either texture or your paper wrinkles into oblivion because it can't handle the heaviness of acrylic or water. So I also might kind of add some dark stripes up in here too. Okay, and I'm gonna be pretty careful of the beak in here. Okay. And there's a tiny little, I don't know, like a little dab of white. Then I'll go in with this white and I'm just gonna let it become, if it needs to become like a bluey gray, that's okay, because that's what it looks like in the photo as well. And then my other wing is also this bluey gray. Sometimes you have to go over, you know, what you've already done in here, just so like that you can get the shape that you want, and that's okay. stuff in there too. So I'll add some purple. And then around the face, it's like this grayish. So I'm just gonna go back into that gray I made earlier. And just the color that was already on my brush is turning it into like a bluey gray, but it is paler. So I'm gonna add some more white, maybe some more purple. And then I'm gonna go in, I'm just gonna go kind of around the eyes here. I will say, if you're gonna worry about any pencil lines that you're being precise about, the eyes are important, because it's more difficult to recreate an eye that you already really liked. It's a little paler up here, so I'll add more white there. A little paler underneath the eye. You know, some of my purple got covered up, so I'll go back in and I'll get some more. It's okay. Sometimes in order to get the effect you need, you have to cover up something else that you've already done, unfortunately. And that's okay. Right now, our birdie looks a little bit demonic because we have not filled its super cute eyeball in, and that's totally normal. It's gonna look crazy town until you fill the eye in and you give it its little cute reflective, you know, catch light. I think I just covered up a little too much with my blue, so I'm just gonna add that back in there. And then as I'm looking at, I'm just looking at like what looks weird, right? So its little behind over here looks weird. Its shoulder looks weird. So let's fix that. So I'm gonna make this like kind of light pink, and I'm just letting the blue go into it a little bit. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more of that pink, and I'm gonna go in with some pure purple because I want it to have a little bit of texture, and I want for this to blend in a little bit more seamlessly. So I'm gonna have a little water on my brush, put that on my gray that I had earlier, and then I am taking a little bit of my cream color and putting that into my gray. And then I'm just gonna essentially put these like gray brush strokes as if like the feathers are like laying on top of its shoulder, right? So instead of its shoulder just like popping out at you, it kind of looked like dislocated, like a dislocated bird shoulder. That would be sad. So now its fur is going, so it doesn't look quite as shocking, right? And then I'm just using the same color, and because that same color is lighter than all of those other ones, it acts as like a nice little highlight, giving it some texture. And then I'll probably do the same thing over here. So this like gray and cream that I mixed, you know, it's very watery, so it's not going to dry as harsh as it's showing up. I'm just going to give a little extra highlight and texture to other parts of my bird. Okay, and its back looks a little too pale, like it needs to be a little darker. So I'll go back in with my dark blue, rehydrate it just a little bit, And I might need to make some more. That's okay. Remembering how you mixed your colors is always a fantastic thing, you know? So if it's hard for you to remember how to mix colors just kind of off the top of your head, but you're like really enjoying a color that you're using, I would highly recommend writing down how you got a color. Or just studying the color wheel. I might make a video at some point on like how the color wheel works, how to achieve pretty much every color on the rainbow, because I feel like mixing colors is always like a tough thing. I'm just going in and adding, it's like this back and forth between like adding highlights, adding shadows, adding color, adding highlights, adding shadows, right? And that is what helps you get the layers for feathers, you know, or fur, you know, depends on what you're working with. But you know, if I just did 2 colors here, I wouldn't get this color variation that looks like not real feathers, you know, it doesn't look hyper realistic, but like it wouldn't look as good if I just did 2 passes. So you just gotta be patient and like just be willing to spend a little bit more time adding layers of colors. Okay. So I'm probably ready to add the shadow on its little beak. And I'm just going to really, really water down this blue. And I'm gonna go on the top and over. Across. Okay, and I'll just let that be. And then I'm gonna make it a little darker with some black. Still really watered down. And I'm gonna go where I see like in between like the joints where like there's just needs to be more contrast that I'm not seeing. So, you know, we added all those shadows underneath the wing, but it's still not as shadowy. And sometimes you just don't like notice that until it's the moment when you're like, oh, I see that I should have done more. That's okay. I'm gonna wipe my brush off and just kind of spread that around a little bit more. Now, where else is there like, so there's should be a little bit of a shadow just right in here. And this is just going back to like what you see versus what you know. So, you know, I could have looked at it earlier and been like, oh, it looks great, you know. But really look at your reference and be like, what is like noticeably different in a bad way? Not just like in a, oh, well, it's like a painting versus, you know, the original, or like mine is like a slightly different style, or I'm a beginner. You know, like what is noticeably different that I don't like, and then change that thing. just for fun, I might give just a little tiny line of a shadow to it. Yeah, I like that. That's cute. Okay, so now it's finally time to fill the eyeball in. And I'm going in with pure black. I don't want this watered down. Already, it does not look insanely creepy anymore. It's great. Okay. Now it looks creepy for a different reason. It looks like Coco from Animal Crossing with its dead, soulless eyes. But we're gonna fix that with a cute little catch light. Actually, look at the reference photo, you guys. There's like a little bright highlight all around the eye. It's like she's wearing eyeshadow. Very cute. So I'm gonna water some white down. Go all the way. Oh, that's pretty. I like that. Okay, so to put the catch light on, and the catch light is just the little like white dot reflection that you see in people's eyes, and it's just from whatever light source, so from the sun or from, you know, a light in your house, or, you know, unless you're in darkness, there's always a light source, and that's always going to be reflecting in your eyes because they're so glossy. So I'm going to get a lot of white paint because I want to just like set it on top. If it's not enough white paint because that black is still wet, it's gonna mix in. I'm just gonna put a little dot. I'm just gonna set my white paint on top, trying to put it on as gently as possible. When it's like a really heavy amount like this and then gently put on, it is a better chance, not always 100% perfect, but it's a better chance of this not mixing in with that wet color, right? And then as you know, I always like notice more things where I'm like, oh wow, like there's more like white kind of feathering around here, and like, oh, there's more here, you know. I feel like you could always just keep going forever and ever, right? So it just depends on how, you know, detailed you really want to get with it. I could always add more white highlights, more shadows, more contrast, you know. At some point, you know, it needs to be good enough, right? I don't know. I really like how it looks right now. Like, I could totally give this to somebody and they'd be like, that's so cute. I love it, you know? So I'm a fan. This is cute. Just maybe to like finish what I have, I'll just like do a really quick, very basic brown branch. The original has a very light color branch. It doesn't need to be. It's like, it depends on the tree type, right? So it could be a darker brown like the one I'm doing. Okay, so I like my branch, it's cute. And when you guys are doing your own paintings as well, you know, if you're doing a background, you're not gonna see any of those pencil lines that are on your edges. I don't see really anything around here. It's really just in the feathers. So I could do more feathers, but I'm really content with how it looks. I think it's really cute, you know, so I'm gonna leave it how it is. If you guys did end up following along or doing your own little birds, whether you did my same reference or if you did a different one, you know, I bet they look really cute. And I'm excited to make more videos with like technical skills. You know, I'm hoping to do one where it's just about blending colors, or maybe I'll do one with fur. I'll do another animal as an example. At some point, I'm going to teach how to draw human faces. I feel like that's really complicated, so we can kind of work our way up to that. But yeah, I'm excited to start this new series. Like and follow for more.